The rain hammered against the windows of Petals and Stem's flower shop with such force that Victoria Hayes wondered if the old glass might shatter. She glanced at the clock hanging above the cash register and sighed. It was nearly closing time. On a Thursday evening, and she still had to finish restocking the cooler before heading home to study for her art therapy exam. Victoria moved between the buckets of fresh flowers, her hands working automatically as she trimmed stems and arranged bouquets. The familiar scent of roses and lilies calmed her nerves, which had been on edge all day. Something about rainy evenings always made her anxious, pulling her back to that terrible night 3 years ago when everything changed. The bell above the door chimed, and Victoria looked up to see a man stumbling inside, completely drenched from the storm. Water dripped from his dark hair onto the collar of what appeared to be an expensive suit, now plastered to his frame. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking somewhat lost, before his eyes focused on her. "I know you're probably closing," he said, his voice rough and tired. "But I need flowers, please." Victoria studied him carefully. He wasn't like their usual customers who wandered in casually browsing. There was something urgent in his posture, something desperate in the way his hands clenched at his sides. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking gray color, but they held a depth of sadness that made her chest tighten. "We're open for another 15 minutes, Victoria said gently, setting down her pruning shears. "What kind of flowers are you looking for?" The man walked further into the shop, leaving a trail of water on the wooden floor. "I don't know exactly. White flowers, I think. Something pure and beautiful. It's for my wife." Victoria felt her stomach drop slightly. Of course he was married. Men like him always were. She pushed the thought aside and moved toward the white flower section. "Anniversary?" "Memorial," he said quietly, and Victoria froze. She turned to look at him again, really look at him this time. Now she could see the grief etched into every line of his face, the way his shoulders sagged as if carrying an invisible weight. This was a man who had lost something precious, and the pain was still fresh despite what she suspected had been considerable time. "I'm so sorry," Victoria whispered, meaning it completely. "How long has it been?" "2 years today," he replied, moving, to stand beside her at the flower display. 2 years, and some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like a lifetime ago. Victoria understood that feeling more than he could know. She reached for a collection of white roses, gardenias, and baby's breath, her mind already composing the arrangement. What was she like? The man seemed surprised by the question. Most people avoided talking about the dead, as if mentioning them might somehow make the grief worse. But Victoria had learned in her studies that sometimes talking about lost, loved ones was the greatest gift you could give the grieving. "Catherine was kind," he said, a small smile touching his lips for the first time. "She laughed at terrible jokes and cried during commercials. She loved gardens and would spend hours tending to her roses. She saw beauty in everything, even when she was sick." Victoria's hands moved skillfully, creating something special as he spoke. She added white orchids for love and delicate stephanotis for happiness in marriage. "She sounds like she was wonderful." "She was," he agreed, watching Victoria work. "I haven't been able to visit her grave in months. Work consumed me and I told myself I was too busy. But the truth is, I was avoiding it, avoiding the pain." "Grief isn't something we get over," Victoria said softly, her hands never stopping. "It's something we learn to carry. Some days the weight feels lighter and some days it feels impossibly heavy." The man looked at her with new interest. "You sound like you know something about loss." Victoria's hands trembled slightly, and she had to pause to steady herself. The familiar tightness began in her chest, that crushing sensation that always preceded her panic attacks. "Not now," she told herself firmly. "Not in front of a customer." But her body didn't listen to logic. Her breathing became shallow, and the flower shop suddenly felt too small, too confining. The rain against the windows sounded like the crash of metal on that horrible night. She gripped the edge of the workbench, trying to ground herself. "Hey!" The man's voice cut through her panic, gentle and concerned. "Are you okay?" Victoria couldn't speak. Her vision blurred, and she felt her knees weakening. Strong hands guided her to the stool behind the counter, and then the man was kneeling in front of her, his gray eyes locked on hers. "Look at me," he said calmly. "Just focus on my voice. You're safe here. Breathe with me. In through your nose. Hold for 4 seconds. Out through your mouth." He demonstrated, and Victoria found herself following his breathing pattern. His presence was steady, unshakable, and somehow that helped anchor her back to reality. Slowly, the panic receded, leaving her exhausted and embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she gasped when she could finally speak. "I don't know what happened." "Don't apologize," he said firmly, still kneeling beside her. "Panic attacks are nothing to be ashamed of. Does this happen often?" Victoria nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Since the accident. My parents died 3 years ago in a car crash. I was in the car too. Rainy nights trigger me sometimes." The man's expression softened with understanding. "And here I am, a stranger, dumping my grief on you while you're dealing with your own." "No," Victoria said quickly. "Helping others helps me. That's why I'm studying art therapy. I want to help people process their pain in healthy ways." He smiled at that, a genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "That's a beautiful calling. I'm James, by the way. James Morrison." "Victoria Hayes," she replied, finally feeling steady enough to stand. James rose with her, giving her space, but staying close enough to help if needed. "Let me finish your arrangement," Victoria said, returning to the workbench. Her hands were steadier now, and she worked with renewed purpose. As she tied the bouquet with a white ribbon, she felt James's eyes on her. "You're very talented," he observed. "This is stunning." Victoria handed him the finished arrangement, their fingers brushing briefly. "I hope it brings you some peace." James looked at the flowers, then back at her. "How much do I owe you?" $45, Victoria said, though she had put at least $70 worth of flowers in the arrangement. Something told her this man needed kindness more than she needed full payment. James pulled out his wallet and handed her $200. "Keep the change, and thank you, Victoria, for the flowers and for understanding." Before she could protest, he was heading toward the door. He paused at the threshold, turning back to look at her. "Would it be inappropriate if I came back tomorrow?" "Just to check on you." Victoria felt her heart skip. "I work every day except Sundays." "Then I'll see you tomorrow," James said, and then he was gone, disappearing into the rain with his flowers. Victoria stood alone in the quiet shop, her mind racing. She didn't know why, but she felt that something significant had just happened. This stranger had helped her through a panic attack with such gentleness and understanding, and in doing so, he had touched something deep inside her that had been frozen since her parents died. She finished closing the shop in a daze, her thoughts consumed by gray eyes and a sad smile. As she locked the door and headed out into the rain, Victoria realized she was actually looking forward to tomorrow. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something other than grief and fear. She felt hope. James Morrison arrived at Petals and Stems exactly when Victoria opened the shop the next morning. She saw him through the window, standing outside with 2 coffee cups in his hands, looking uncertain. When their eyes met, he smiled, and Victoria felt that flutter in her chest again. She unlocked the door and let him in. "You came back." "I said I would," James replied, handing her one of the cups. "Vanilla latte with extra foam. I took a guess." Victoria accepted the coffee, surprised and touched. "How did you know?" "You seem like someone who appreciates sweetness," he said simply. They stood there for a moment, neither quite sure what to say. Finally, James cleared his throat. "I wanted to make sure you were okay after last night. That panic attack seemed intense." "I'm fine," Victoria assured him. "They're scary when they happen, but I've learned to manage them. Thank you for helping me through it." "My wife had anxiety attacks near the end," James said quietly. "When the cancer treatments became too much, I learned how to help her breathe through them." Victoria set her coffee down and began preparing the shop for the day, grateful for something to do with her hands. James didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter and watched her work, and somehow his presence felt comfortable rather than intrusive. "Tell me about art therapy," he said. "How does it work?" Victoria's face lit up as she explained her passion. "Art gives people a way to express emotions they can't put into words. When someone experiences trauma, sometimes talking about it feels impossible. But painting or sculpting or even arranging flowers can help them process those feelings in a safe way." "Is that what flowers do for you?" James asked perceptively. Victoria nodded. "Every arrangement tells a story. Every color and bloom has meaning. When I create something beautiful from individual stems, it reminds me that broken pieces can become something whole again." James was quiet for a long moment. "I think I need that. To remember how to be whole again." Something shifted between them in that moment. Victoria saw past the expensive suit and the successful exterior to the wounded man underneath, and James saw past Victoria's youth and gentle demeanor to the strength she carried. "Come back tomorrow," Victoria said impulsively. "We can talk more." James did come back, and the day after that, and the day after that. Over the following weeks, their friendship deepened in unexpected ways. James began arriving every morning with coffee, and they would talk before customers arrived. He told her about his technology company, about the pressure of running a business he had built from nothing. Victoria shared her dreams of opening her own therapy center someday, a place where trauma survivors could heal through art. "Why not start now?" James asked one morning. Victoria laughed, though there was sadness in it. "Because dreams require money, and I can barely afford rent and tuition." "What if you had funding?" James pressed. "Then I'd still need a space, supplies, certification, insurance." Victoria counted off on her fingers. "It's not that simple." But she saw the wheels turning in James's mind, and it both excited and frightened her. Their coffee talks evolved into walks through Boston Common after Victoria's shifts. James began to smile more, the deep sadness in his eyes gradually lifting. Victoria found herself thinking about him constantly, looking forward to each morning with an anticipation that felt both wonderful and terrifying. One afternoon, Victoria's roommate Natalie cornered her in their small apartment. "Okay, you need to tell me about this mystery man who brings you coffee every single day." Victoria felt her cheeks flush. "We're just friends." "Friends," Natalie repeated skeptically. "Is that why you've been floating around here like you're in a romance novel?" "It's complicated," Victoria insisted. "He's older, he's wealthy, and he's still grieving his wife. Nothing can happen between us." "Does he know that?" Natalie asked gently. "Because from what you've told me, this man is falling for you," Victoria wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. She had seen the way James looked at her, the way his face softened when she spoke, and she had felt her own feelings growing, despite her best efforts to keep them platonic. The turning point came 3 months after their first meeting. James invited Victoria to dinner at his penthouse, insisting he wanted to cook for her. Victoria almost declined, knowing that crossing that threshold meant acknowledging what was building between them. But she went anyway. James's penthouse overlooked the Charles River, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern elegance. Victoria felt overwhelmed by the luxury, so different from her tiny apartment with its second-hand furniture and peeling paint. "Don't do that," James said, reading her discomfort. "Don't let the money create distance between us." "How can it not?" Victoria asked, gesturing around. "This is your world. Mine is so different." James took her hand, the first time he had touched her beyond brief, accidental contact. "My world was empty before you walked into it. The money, the success, none of it mattered because I had forgotten how to feel anything. You taught me to live again." Victoria's breath caught. "James, I know this is complicated," he continued, his gray eyes intense. "I know I come with baggage, but Victoria, when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to hope, to want a future instead of just surviving each day." "I'm afraid," Victoria admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm afraid of getting hurt, of not being enough for you." James cupped her face gently in his hands. "You're afraid? I'm terrified. I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone again. The guilt of moving on, of wanting someone who isn't Catherine. It keeps me awake at night." "What do we do?" Victoria asked. "We be honest," James said. "We take this slowly. We give each other permission to be scared." When he kissed her, it was soft and careful, asking rather than demanding. Victoria melted into it, her hands gripping his shirt as if he might disappear. The kiss deepened, and Victoria felt something unlock inside her chest, a door she had kept firmly closed since her parents died. James pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. "We don't have to rush anything." "I need to tell you something," Victoria said, her heart pounding. "I've never been with anyone. I've never been intimate with anyone." She expected surprise or maybe disappointment. Instead, James's expression filled with tenderness. "Thank you for trusting me with that." "Does it bother you?" Victoria asked nervously. "No," James said firmly. "It humbles me. Victoria, if we do this, if we really try to build something together, I promise to be gentle. With your heart, you've given me so much already." Victoria touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "Be gentle with me," she whispered. "In every way. I've never felt safe enough to let someone close. But with you, I want to try." James kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I'll spend every day proving you can trust me." They sat together on his couch, overlooking the city lights, Victoria tucked against his side, and talked until sunrise. They spoke about their fears and hopes, about the people they had lost, and the life they might build. When Victoria finally went home as dawn broke over Boston, she knew everything had changed. She had let someone past her walls. And somehow, in being vulnerable with James, she had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. The strength to love again, despite all the reasons she had to stay closed off, the strength to believe in possibilities, even when the world had taught her that beautiful things could be taken away. James had been gentle with her heart, just as he promised. And in doing so, he had awakened parts of Victoria she thought had died with her parents. She was learning to live again, too. 6 months passed, like a dream Victoria never wanted to wake from. James became her anchor, and she became his light. They moved carefully through their relationship, learning each other's rhythms and respecting each other's healing processes. Victoria still had her panic attacks, and James still had days when grief for Catherine hit him hard. But they faced these moments together, proving that love didn't erase pain but made it bearable. Victoria was in her final semester of art therapy school, balancing classes, clinical hours, and her work at the flower shop. James supported her through late-night study sessions and nervous breakdowns before exams. He never pushed her about their physical relationship, content to hold her close and wait until she felt ready. The challenges came from unexpected places. One Saturday afternoon, James invited Victoria to lunch with someone special. They met at a quiet restaurant in Cambridge, and Victoria's stomach twisted with nerves when she saw the elegant older woman waiting at their table. "Victoria, this is Rebecca Sterling," James said gently. "Catherine's mother." Victoria's hand trembled as she shook Rebecca's hand. The woman's eyes were the same warm brown as Catherine's had been in the photos Victoria had seen. Rebecca studied her with an intensity that made Victoria want to disappear. "So you're the girl who's captured my son-in-law's heart," Rebecca said, her tone unreadable. "Rebecca," James warned, but Victoria squeezed his hand under the table. "I understand this must be difficult for you," Victoria said quietly. "I never intended to replace Catherine. No one could." Rebecca's expression cracked slightly. No one could replace her. But James loved her, and she loved him. And the last thing Catherine said to me before she died was that she didn't want James to be alone forever. Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. "She sounds like she was an amazing person." "She was," Rebecca agreed, her own eyes glistening, "and she would have liked you, I think. James tells me you're studying to help people heal from trauma." "I'm trying," Victoria said. "Loss changes us, but it doesn't have to destroy us." Rebecca reached across the table and took Victoria's hand. "You've brought him back to us. For the first year after Catherine died, James was a ghost. He went through the motions of living but wasn't really alive. When he talks about you, I see light in his eyes again." The lunch became easier after that. Rebecca shared stories about Catherine that made them all laugh and cry. Victoria learned about the woman James had loved first, and instead of feeling jealous, she felt grateful. Catherine had shaped James into the man capable of being gentle with broken hearts. As winter melted into spring, Victoria defended her thesis and graduated with honors. James sat in the audience beaming with pride, and afterward, he took her to an address across town she didn't recognize. "Where are we going?" Victoria asked as they pulled up to a beautiful brownstone building. "Close your eyes," James said, excitement in his voice. He led her inside, and when Victoria opened her eyes, she gasped. The space had been transformed into a therapy center. Natural light poured through large windows. One room was set up for painting, another for sculpture, a third for group sessions. There was even a small greenhouse area for horticultural therapy. "What is this?" Victoria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Your dream," James said simply. "The Victoria Hayes Center for Art and Healing. Everything is ready. The licensing, the insurance, the supplies. All you have to do is decide when to open." Victoria turned to him, overwhelmed. "James, this is too much. I can't accept this." "You're not accepting charity," James said firmly. "Consider it an investment. I believe in what you're going to do here. I believe in the lives you're going to change." Victoria threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "I don't deserve you." "You deserve everything," James murmured into her hair. "Let me give you the world, Victoria. Let me show you how much you mean to me." That night, back at James's penthouse, something shifted. Victoria looked at this man who had been so patient, so gentle, so completely devoted to her healing. She thought about how he had never pressured her, never made her feel inadequate for needing time. "I'm ready," she said softly as they stood by the windows overlooking the city. James understood immediately. "Are you sure? There's no rush." "I'm sure," Victoria said, taking his hand. "I trust you completely. Be gentle with me." "Always," James promised. He led her to his bedroom, and everything that followed was tender and careful and filled with so much love that Victoria wept. James held her through it all, whispering reassurances, checking that she was okay, making her feel cherished and safe. When it was over, Victoria lay in his arms, understanding what true intimacy meant. It wasn't just physical. It was the complete trust of giving someone your most vulnerable self. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," James replied, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for letting me in." 2 months later, Victoria stood in the bathroom of James's penthouse, staring at a pregnancy test with shaking hands. She and James had been careful, but not careful enough. The two pink lines seemed to glow in accusation. She was terrified to tell him. They had never discussed children. James was 35 and had already grieved the family he thought he would have with Catherine. Victoria was only 23, just starting her career. A baby would change everything. When James came home that evening, Victoria was curled on the couch, the test hidden in her pocket. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, reading her distress. Victoria pulled out the test with trembling hands. "I'm pregnant." James stared at it for a long moment, and Victoria's heart sank. But then he looked at her, and his eyes were filled with tears. "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "You're not angry?" Victoria asked. "Angry?" James laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Victoria, I'm terrified and excited and completely unprepared, but I'm also happier than I've been in years. We're creating a life together, a family." 3 weeks later, James took Victoria back to Petals and Stems, the flower shop where they first met. Natalie and Rebecca were waiting inside, along with Thomas, James's business partner, who had become a dear friend. James got down on one knee among the flowers, holding a simple diamond ring. "Victoria Hayes, you taught me to live again. You showed me that having a gentle heart doesn't mean being weak. It means being strong enough to stay soft in a hard world. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Victoria sobbed, pulling him up to kiss him. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." They married quietly 2 months later in the flower shop, surrounded by the people they loved. Victoria wore a simple white dress and carried white roses. Her growing belly was just beginning to show. As James slid the ring onto her finger, Victoria thought about that rainy night when a grieving stranger had stumbled into her shop. She had been so broken then, so afraid of letting anyone close. But James had been gentle with her heart, and in doing so, he had taught her to be gentle with his. Their daughter was born in October, with gray eyes like her father and dark hair like her mother. They named her Hope Catherine Morrison, honoring both the future and the past. The Victoria Hayes Center for Art and Healing opened its doors that same month, offering free therapy to trauma survivors. Victoria's first client was a young widow learning to navigate life after loss. As Victoria guided her through painting her grief, she understood the full circle of healing. She had been broken. James had been broken. Together, they had created something beautiful. Love hadn't fixed everything. Victoria still had panic attacks sometimes. James still grieved Catherine on hard days. But they faced these moments together, holding each other gently through the storms. They had learned that being gentle with someone's heart was the most powerful thing you could do. It meant honoring their wounds while believing in their strength. It meant patient love that healed rather than demanded. And in the end, that gentle love had changed both their lives forever.